at some point during the run of The Wire, I became a fellow traveler of the Libertarians,
Right. Yeah.
and then a great disappointment to them in that we were
We're
only
hoping to continue that. With
in
this
that we, in
interview.
that.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're sitting with David Simon, the acclaimed writer, producer, and creator of The Wire, a series that ran on HBO for 5 seasons and is considered by many critics to be the best TV show of all time. A former Baltimore Sun reporter, he's also the author of Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, which was later turned into a series for NBC, and he wrote and produced the HBO miniseries The Corner. Simon's current project is Treme, which is starting its 3rd season on HBO. The series offers a multifaceted look at New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about Treme. Watching the first 3 seasons of the show, I kept thinking of the Faulkner line about how the past isn't dead. In the South, it is even past. And your show seems to be very much focused on people who are trying to maintain or keep consistent and true New Orleans culture, but then there's also a stark recognition that things have to change.
You are correct. There is always a tension, between tradition and the past, and organic creativity, and I think that's probably true in any city, but it's particularly dynamic in New Orleans. And the amazing thing about New Orleans is they're not willing to let anything go. I mean, there's still bands that are down there that are playing.
But does that make them kind of like cultural hoarders, where if your
house
is full of crap, like you can, and I don't mean it's just stacked to the gills.
If it were crap, yes.
New.
If it were crap, yes, but no. I mean, if you're familiar with their actual culture, the music scene down there is more dynamic, pound for pound, than any I've ever seen in the world. I mean, there is a punk sea shanty band.
Which shows up in the show.
Yeah, actually, we did them on Mardi Gras. A punk sea shanty band.
Right.
I mean, on some level, that's just gorgeous.
Right.
That's just only in New Orleans, as they say.
It's a complex text, as I think Treme. When I first started watching it, I have to say, I saw the John Goodman character, and I was like, wow, this is awful. I mean, this is a white guilt liberal. And I was kind of happy when he died in the end of the first season.
You might want to reflect on that.
I believe me, I will. But in the sense that the show completely, and I was obviously looking at him very quickly, the show is very.
The reason
layered.
that I think The Wire was intriguing to a lot of people once they found it, and not initially intriguing at all to many people, but once they found it, once they realized it was actually shaped a little bit differently than television entertainment, one of the things that we did was we were not interested in straw men.
Right.
So you could look at it, you could be a conservative, and you could come to some conclusions that gratified you. Now, I would not agree with the conclusions, but there was at least evidence in there for you to proceed down your path and be moderately content with the storytelling. You could do that if you were a liberal. You could do that if you were a socialist. You could do that if you were a libertarian. You could find things where you felt as if you were traveling with good fellas. That doesn't mean that it didn't have a point of view. That doesn't mean that it's truly an empty tablet.
Right.
But the trick to making anything that matters is to not treat the source material as if it's your own, as if you can indulge your own political dialectic by picking and choosing.
Right.
Because the world is more complicated than that. And that's a rigor that we have with all. There are a lot of people, a lot of people who are very opposed to the Iraq War as an intervention, and I was opposed to the Iraq War as a war of choice. Some of them had a hard time with the initial episodes of Generation Kill. The Marines are very profane. They very much are hungry to go to war. It's what they do. It's what we train them for. I don't blame them in the slightest. And they wanted a dissertation from Ed Burns and David Simon and Evan Wright about why this war was wrong. I don't know how to write for that kind of person. I'm not interested in writing for that kind of person. I'm only interested in writing for the kind of person who first wants to know what was it like for the Marines and who are these guys. Right. That's job one. And when John Goodman says things like San Francisco is a cesspool with hills, that's a clue. San Francisco is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, but it's very hard to do TV on that level because most people expect American TV. They expect somebody to say something, and they expect somebody to right afterwards say, that's not right, you know, and to actually correct the record almost within the scene.
What is it about the HBO model that actually allows for a kind of Balzacian complexity to emerge?
Balzacian?
No, it is. I mean, this is...
Did you just call me a ball sack?
I called you a ball sack, yeah.
I thought so. I knew we were going to get down to this.
Yeah, no, this is... So now that let's take...
Damn you libertarians.
No, but what is it about HBO and other... I mean, you know, and this is part of the irony, right, is that it's in a place where you got to pay more, but then you get better art, it seems, than you do on free TV.
That's all. Yeah. That's all true of all TV.
Yeah.
I didn't used to pay for television 25 years ago. I had rabbit ears like you did.
Yeah.
And it beamed 3 or 4 channels in, and that was what you got. And when they hooked you up to the cable, and they created a revenue stream, they were able to create more programming. It was a remarkably shrewd and effective way of expanding the television universe, and for the better.
Right.
And I would argue that, tellingly, newspapers as an industry went the opposite way. Mm-hmm. What happened with newspapers in the industry was Wall Street. The great sin was taking what were community-based, family-owned newspapers, linking them together in chains, making them public companies, and going to Wall Street with them. Because Wall Street did to the industry of newspapering what they did to other industries, which is to
so when you say Wall Street, I mean, do you mean the Tribune Company, or do you mean
No, I mean
Goldman
the analysts.
Sachs?
I mean the operating dynamic of Wall Street. I'm saying the dynamic, capitalism.
Right.
Talk to any Baltimorean about what the Baltimore Sun has become. Right. There are 130 people over at that newsroom now. There used to be 600. Right. There used to be... Now, you want to say they could have gone down to 500 once they stopped publishing? What are we arguing about? Right. At a certain point, nobody's covering the city courthouse. At a certain point...
I mean, this is, and I don't know Baltimore. I know a lot of people at the Los Angeles Times, and it would be hard to say that newspaper is any worse than it was in 1995 or 1955, because it had always been a booster...
I don't know what to say to you.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say to you. You're bringing things that are not rooted in empiricism. You have some emotional disconnect.
No, I'm just saying that the LA Times has always been first and foremost a booster for the idea of Los Angeles.
You're bringing some sort of weird ideology into it.
Actually, I think that's
some opinion about. Well,
then what are you doing? I mean, you're.
I'm bringing the amount of ground covered. That's what I'm interested in. Okay. You know, I never had. Everyone imagines some sort of. Have you ever worked at a newspaper?
Yeah.
Which one?
I worked in a couple of newspapers in New Jersey briefly. The Home News in New Brunswick was the one that's still in business.
Okay.
And the Red Bank
did you ever work at like a newspaper? Like, do you think there's like an agenda in a newsroom where?
No, I don't.
Right. The agenda.
Okay.
The agenda is when it's healthy and when you have enough to do and you have enough people to do it. The agenda is to cover the ground and to cover it smarter and to find out what really the fuck is going on. And it's a very imperfect science, and you fail as much as you succeed. But, you know, like anything worth trying, and like anything worth doing, you fail as much as you succeed. But I never had anybody say to me, "We're doing this, and we think this is good or we think this is bad." They basically just planted me on the beat, and they planted 5 of us on the crime beat. There was a court reporter every day that you could work with, the city courts, which were inextricably linked. There were 3 police reporters. At any given moment, there were GA reporters that could be thrown into law enforcement issues, and we covered more ground. Mm-hmm. There's one guy left. There's one guy. He's working his ass off.
No, I see the absolute logic of your argument.
That's true at the Baltimore Sun. That's true at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. That's true at the Cleveland Plain Dealer. That's true at the Los Angeles Times.
What I'm saying is that when you might have more people covering stuff, but you did not have a moment where the Los Angeles Times was somehow a more, and it doesn't need to be negative, but I don't know that it was interrogating the power structure in Los Angeles when it had twice as many reporters writing about stuff. That's
if you want to critique what they didn't do.
No, but what I'm saying is that if the purpose
there's a fallacy in what you're saying.
And what I'm saying, though, is that now you can read many sources coming out of Los Angeles, including the Los Angeles Times. I think probably City Hall and the power structure is more aptly covered than it was under a traditional model where
I couldn't disagree more. And I can only cite what's going on in Baltimore.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. There's more commentary, there's more debate, there's more discussion. The internet is a great democratization.
I would argue
of
there is
content.
also more firsthand reporting, observation.
I don't know what to
reporting,
tell you. It's not happening here in the city
Okay.
in which you are sitting.
Yeah.
It's not happening in New Orleans.
Okay.
It's not happening in any city where mainstream media has
Right.
retrenched. It is not happening.
One of the things that was striking in a recent interview you did with Bill Moyers, you said, I don't believe in institutions anymore. You're cynical about those, and I'm paraphrasing, but that you believe in individuals. Yet your understanding of society, which is one of the reasons why, I called you a ball sack, and I meant a Balzac because, fundamentally.
But I am a ball sack.
I'm not going to parse that, but,
proud to be
fundamentally,
one.
your work is about institutions of power and of
Right.
movement, and not it's
Right.
on all different
So,
levels.
but what is the solution?
Have you boxed yourself in where you?
No.
If you don't believe in institutions, then
No, see, I'm a grown-up.
How do
I'm a
individuals
grown-up.
change things? Then?
I am a grown-up.
Okay.
Okay, and it comes down to this. And this is where I really, it's where I get exhausted with the notion of, well, there's been corruption there, so let's throw up our hands and declare that this is too much government. This is how government does it. What is your freaking alternative? There is never going to be permanent institutional stasis where something's always,
Right.
everything will corrode, everything will rust, everything will need to be replaced, everything will need to be challenged and continually policed. Freedom, somebody much wiser than me, my father used to say this at every single Passover Seder. This was his one bit of wisdom. He never let a year go by without saying, he goes, freedom can never be entirely won, ever, but it can be lost. And the way in which you lose it, I've come to believe, is not by acknowledging the inevitability of communal action and institutional necessity, but it's by walking away from our ownership, our collective assertions of demand on the performance of that institution.
Let me ask you this, though, because, and again, I mean, things like charter schools, things like school vouchers, or getting out where you can get on a lifeboat or the last free school out of Casablanca, these are libertarian ideas. There's a way of changing the institutions so they serve the individuals they're supposed to serve.
If it's funded, if you're willing to take the same dollar that you were
Yeah.
giving to a public school system.
We have not stinted on increasing the amount of money we spend per pupil over the past 40 years. We have nothing, literally
You will not
nothing
get
to
me
show.
defending the performance of public education.
But to bring it back to Treme.
But the idea of public education is
well, again, I mean,
lowercase p, lowercase c.
Milton Friedman is the godfather of the school choice movement, and that's so.
But he'll have to answer for that one day.
Well, he has a few things to answer for. But in Treme, though, so in the arc of the series, and as we go through the third season, would you say that you start to show like green shoots of where the people, because at every
Yes.
level and in different cases, everything is corrupt. I mean, the public
Right.
sector, the private sector, individual morals are corrupted,
They're doing
aesthetics, and so
Individuals start doing what they can. And there is nothing in The Wire, and there is nothing in Treme that argues against individual responsibility towards the collective. And that's where I find patriotism and find citizenship. You're not seeing people in Treme in season 3 begin to police themselves and to make their neighborhood safer. That's beyond their capabilities. For that, they need law enforcement professionals. But you do see them start to stand up on their hind legs and say, the way you're behaving as an institution is unacceptable.
And creating alternatives. I mean, they're building their businesses, or they're creating art that is empowering themselves and the people around them. I mean,
they're seeking reform.
Yeah.
And sometimes that involves trying to reform the necessary institution. And sometimes, certainly in the private sector, if they're starting a new business, that's a new business.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing against venture capitalism.
Right.
What I am arguing against in that piece is disaster capitalism.
Or disaster socialism, and the two things may be inextricably linked. Disaster socialism. I mean, the amount of money, and part of this is part of Treme, is that the amount of public money that floods into New Orleans and the way that gets diverted from meaningful purpose.
Well,
is
where
part
do
of
you
the
think
show.
it went?
Yeah, well, no, I'm saying, but I know
Do you think it actually got to people?
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying. But I know where it came from, and it came from the government, and it came from taxes. So that's an aspect of. I mean, I think we're talking about twin sides of the same process.
Listen, let's journey down this road together, because Louisiana is the jurisdiction in the world that jails more human beings per capita than any other. More than
So in the Gulag nation of the world, it is the shining
we are
star.
The Gulag
yeah,
nation
no,
of the
that's
world.
what I'm saying. And then Louisiana is the
Louisiana
Gulag.
puts the rest of America to shame.
Right.
That's a function of that's pure market forces.
Right.
There's profit to be made. They've monetized the poor down there. That's what they've done. They've left it laissez-faire. Hey, we put these laws on the books. If you get locked up, prison industries for you, and we're going to make money off you.
Wow.
Now, we're all paying for that.
Right.
But people are getting rich.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I would say, again, I'm not shifting jurisdictions here, but in California, the single most powerful group in state government is the State Prison Guards Union, and they're not lobbying to get people out of jail.
And they were damn near bankrupted the state with look at the Rockefeller laws, look at the drug war.
Sure.
There are some things that the market is not supposed to dictate.
Sure, but I mean, is it the market, or is it in the case of immigrant incarceration and deportations? I mean, that's the Obama administration, which has almost doubled the rate at which George Bush. So that I mean, I understand where you're coming from, but it just seems to me that it's missing. These people might be drafting off of policies that are put in place ahead of time. I don't think Nelson Rockefeller didn't need drug laws to get rich or to make his cronies rich.
No.
He was doing that before.
No, he needed them to get elected.
To final.
But I agree with that. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
Again, it's got to be across the board.
Right.
Politicians will follow the path of least resistance if you let them and if you reward them for that. The whole idealized notion that the private sector can do this better than government. I don't want the private sector doing prisons better than government. I want government doing it reluctantly.
Right.
I want my prison department, I want my corrections department in the state of Maryland or any state that I'm in to be a reluctant agent of government.
You were disappointed with Obama. President Obama has said that The Wire is his favorite show.
I'm disappointed with him in some ways. I'm very proud of him in other ways.
Well, what I was going to ask, particularly about drug laws, first off, do you see the positive trends? I mean, there's marijuana legalization initiatives out there.
Well, the only positive trend that I see that really matters is I think more people are calling bullshit on it. And this is where I at some point during the run of The Wire, I became a fellow traveler of the Libertarians, and then a great disappointment to them in that we were only
hoping to continue that.
In that we were only fellow travelers on occasion, but the libertarian position on drugs absolutely works. It absolutely works on personal privacy and on because it's right. It's correct. It's morally correct.
Do you take Obama at his word that The Wire is his favorite show? Because it seems odd that and Eric Holder as well, it seems odd that they would have watched the show and then be pursuing the policies that they had. And not to make it a one-directional political...
I don't know about Eric Holder. I do take him at his word because he had the actors there and he knew the show.
Right.
And the actors told me he knew the show. And I don't disagree with Obama's fundamental politics or some of his purposes. I'll be voting for Obama. I have a choice of two. I'm not wasting my vote. It can always get worse.
Do you think New Orleans is getting better? I mean, because the show is a couple of years back in time, but I mean, New Orleans actually, the number of people who have returned is higher than the initial projections or expectations. Is it actually flourishing?
It depends on who you are. It depends on who you are. They called the area that didn't go under the water, the sliver by the river, the Isle of Denial. And there is a schizophrenia. I mean, you go out to Gentilly and there are blocks where you'll see 2 or 3 people back, and house after house that are still not restored. But New Orleans before the storm, 77% of the population was born there. That's unheard of in America. Everyone's from somewhere else in this country. But if you're born there, if you grow up with that culture, if you grow up with that essence, it's very hard to say goodbye to it. And a lot of stuff's coming. I mean, again, it's not a museum piece. the number of Latinos, Central Americans, and Mexicans that came into New Orleans to do construction work after Katrina, and now have stayed on. You're going to start seeing some version of the mariachi second line band, and it won't just be on Cinco de Mayo. It'll be. I mean, they're now going to contribute to the musical culture and to the cuisine, and New Orleans is again all the attendant problems of the American city and I think city living is what Americans have to master. But man, they make it hard. And I think that's the 21st century challenge, among other things. There's a lot of 21st century challenges, don't overstate it. But that's one of them for us, is how do we learn to love the city for what it is, because we have no choice.
Well, on that note, David Simon, creator of Treme, most recently, thank you for talking to Reason TV. I'm Nick Gillespie.
Thank you.
Thank you. And produced the HBO miniseries The Corner. Simon's current project is Treme, which is starting its third season on HBO. The series offers a multifaceted look at New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about Treme. Watching the first 3 seasons of the show, I kept thinking of the Faulkner line about how the past isn't dead. In the South, it is even past. And your show seems to be very much focused on people who are trying to maintain or keep consistent and true New Orleans culture, but then there's also a stark recognition that things have to change.
You are correct. There is always a tension. At some point during the run of The Wire, I became a fellow traveler of the Libertarians, and then a great disappointment to them in that we were
We're only hoping to continue that. Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and today we're sitting with David Simon, the acclaimed writer, producer, and creator of The Wire, a series that ran on HBO for 5 seasons and is considered by many critics to be the best TV show of all time. A former Baltimore Sun reporter, he's also the author of Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets, which was later turned into a series for NBC. And he wrote, but in the sense that the show completely, and I was obviously looking at him very quickly, the show is very
The reason
late.
that I think The Wire was intriguing to a lot of people once they found it, and not initially intriguing at all to many people, but once they found it, once they realized it was actually shaped a little bit differently than television entertainment, one of the things that we did was we were not interested in straw men.
Right.
So you could look at it, you could be a conservative, and you could come to some conclusions that gratified you. Now, I would not agree with the conclusions, but there was at least, there is more dynamic, pound for pound, than any I've ever seen in the world. I mean, there is a punk sea shanty band.
Which shows up in the show.
Yeah, actually, we did them on Mardi Gras. A punk sea shanty band.
Right.
I mean, on some level, that's just gorgeous.
Right.
That's just only in New Orleans, as they say.
It's a complex text, as I think Treme, when I first started watching it, I have to say, I saw the John Goodman character and I was like, wow, this is awful. I mean, this is a white guilt liberal, and I was kind of happy when he died in the end of the first season.
You might want to reflect on that.
I believe me,
between tradition in the past and organic creativity. And I think that's probably true in any city, but it's particularly dynamic in New Orleans. And the amazing thing about New Orleans is they're not willing to let anything go. I mean, there's still bands that are down there that are playing.
But does that make them kind of like cultural hoarders, where if your
in
house is full of crap, like you can, and I don't mean it's just stacked to the gills.
If it were crap, yes.
New.
If it were crap, yes, but no. I mean, if you're familiar with their actual culture. The music scene down